Hi, I'm Julie Franks Murray, creator of the YouTube channel and Facebook page by the same name and host of the Soul Alchemist podcast. Welcome. I want to talk to you today about boundaries, but before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that if you find value in this content today, please hit like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments about the subject or other subjects regarding empowerment or spirituality that you would like for me to weigh in on, or just a comment, please put it in the box below. Okay. Better boundaries. We all want them and need them in different areas of our life, no matter how practiced we are at saying the magic yes and the magic no and meaning it. We all have areas and relationships in our life where we struggle a bit. And so for me, in all of my years of trying to make all of this conscious and understand in what ways I'm sabotaging myself, and in talking to people who have the same problem, it may seem a little obvious. But the number one key, the foundational key to having better boundaries, is knowing the ground that you're trying to stand on. You really can't stand your ground until you know your ground. And knowing your ground consists of three things: jurisdiction, your values or principles, and your habits. So number one, jurisdiction. So what do you think of when I say the word jurisdiction? Let me define it for you as I mean it. Jurisdiction is your kingdom. It's what you have control over and responsibility for and authority with. Jurisdiction contains your possessions. It contains your time. It's all of the things that you're responsible for. So, in maintaining boundaries, sometimes understanding where the jurisdictional lines are in any given situation can help you, big time. Because if someone comes to me in my home and they start trying to manipulate me or push on a boundary that I'm saying no to, or yes, depending on the situation, they are out of their jurisdictional space. They have infringed at that point upon my kingdom, what I control and have authority over. They're out of their jurisdiction. And so understanding and knowing that in any given situation helps me to have better boundaries. And sometimes it's not real clear. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky. Most of us, we all have areas of shared jurisdictional spaces, like when we go to work. If we're not the owner of the company, then we are employees just like everyone else is an employee, and we have authority and control over what our boss, what the managers give us authority and control over. But so does every other employee. Like, for instance, if I have my own office at my job, then if someone comes in there and starts making a bunch of noise, or complaining, or turning off fans, or throwing down trash, or leaving their canned Coke in there, then knowing that that's my jurisdictional space that I've been given control and authority over, I can maintain those boundary lines better. Nope, I control things in here. This is a shared space, but this is the area where I control. If you don't like it, go to your office or your space where you do control, where you control what's yours. And sometimes just understanding the jurisdictional space can be, it can head so much off at the pass, because where we're not sure where we have the authority, we're not going to draw a hard line in the sand and stand there and be willing to fight, with someone over. We're just not going to do that as much when we're not sure of the space. And our time is another type of jurisdiction. Like When someone calls you on your time and space, on your phone, unsolicited, and they want to go into this big old long spiel about why they need to sell you whatever it is they want to sell you, or doing a poll, or whatever it is that they want to do. No, you have called me in my sacred time and space, and maybe that's a better definition, really, for jurisdiction. Sacred, your own sacred time and space, your own kingdom where you do rule. It's sacred. People can't just infringe anytime they want to. It's not allowed. They wouldn't want you doing that to them. So I don't mean being rude and cutting people off necessarily, but like in the example of someone calling my house, I will tell them one time, I will outline the boundary. No, I'm not interested in this. Thank you. If they don't listen, they get clicked on. Click. And that's on them. And it just has to be that way. If the few that listen to me and they say, okay, thank you for your time, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. Bye. And there's not an infringement. So understanding the jurisdictional space that you're in has great weight and gravitas in being able to stand your ground and maintain a boundary. Well, and it not only maintain a boundary, it gives you clarity and discernment where to draw boundary lines. Absolutely does. I have had a number of friends or acquaintances that in one circumstance or another they allow house guests to stay with them. Maybe someone needs a place to crash or whatever. And you hear horror stories. And trying to be nice, my friends or the people that I know would step back and step back and step back off the line and step back, trying to make peace or trying to accommodate people. And I know sometimes it's easier when you're a third party looking in, but I would ask the question, whose space are they in? Whose time are they occupying? Whose business are they getting involved in? Oh, yours? Okay, then you have the jurisdictional authority to establish where that boundary line needs to be. You are the sovereign of your kingdom. And people won't always know or respect a line that they even know where it should be. Even if they know where the line is and they know they're overstepping the line. They won't always do that. They won't always obey what they know to be true unless someone else establishes the line and says this far and no further. And you being the jurisdictional authority in your own space and time with your own resources is pivotal and key to maintaining healthy boundaries. Okay. Number 2, values and principles. Sometimes you're in a situation where the jurisdictional space isn't always crystal clear, but there is going to be a value or a principle that's guiding your behavior. Let me give you an example. I typically, because I am so jurisdictionally aware, I mind my own business in shared spaces. I do not get involved with people, even if I don't agree with what they're doing or how they're doing it in a shared space, unless they cross a very core principle or value for me. For example, if there is an abuse of power near me that I'm seeing, someone, and we've all had instances of this where we've been somewhere and it's a shared space, it's not a building or that we own, it's not necessarily anything that we're responsible for directly, but we'll see a peer, someone we don't have authority over ordinarily, we will see a peer mistreat or talk down to or be rude to or steamroller over someone who is of a more peaceful disposition or of a weaker, they just don't have as much power in their personality. They're not a forceful personality, and they don't stand up for themselves. We've all seen this, had instances where this has happened. And in that space, it's not my jurisdictional space, it's not my jurisdictional time, And I don't have authority over either one of these people, but because I have the principle and the value that stronger people need to be advocates and heroes for the weaker people, and not take advantage of them and make them victims. That principle has guided my behavior in interfering, in stepping over what ordinarily would have kept me, quote unquote, in my place. I will get out of my jurisdiction to address an abuse of power. And so knowing your values and your principles, that, what is it they say, this isn't the hill I want to die on. Like a lot of things in your life, it's not, you can be contrary, but it's not the hill you want to die on. But I want to say, as far as values and principles go, those are going to be basically the hill that you're going to want to die on. And it's not about going around trying to impose your will on everyone whenever they cross something you don't like. But I mean in terms of justice and the weightier matters of justice and compassion and truth-telling. I mean, sometimes you're in an environment where maybe someone who has authority over you, maybe a boss or the owner of a company, a landlord, someone who has jurisdiction over your time or your space, is trying to put the screws to you and get you to do something that you know is not right. You're going to have to invoke the higher law of the value or the principle that goes beyond that, that says, no, this is wrong. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to steal. I'm going to speak up, and I'm going to maintain my boundaries. So knowing those principles and values beforehand, really getting out a piece of paper and writing down, and even sometimes people don't always know what their values and principles are. Where I might offer a suggestion is notice where you feel that there's something wrong with the world, like a pain in the world, or a place in the world or in society where you feel pain, where you feel that advocate or that hero energy come over you, and you want to protect or save or do what's right or speak up. That's going to hint to values and principles. And sometimes even just writing those down, knowing the big lines that you won't cross and you won't allow to be crossed by others, is being conscious of that, just like with jurisdiction, will make standing your boundaries much more easy. You'll have you'll have the power from within and the conviction from within that will enable you to stand your ground, because you know your ground. You know your ground of your convictions and your values, and those are things that you've decided you're not going to stand aside for. Okay. Number 3 to knowing your ground is practice, practice, practice. It really is practice makes perfect of the first two. It's never comfortable to begin to change a habit, to kind of go outside of yourself and to push your own boundaries and your own comfort zones. But where you know you need to take a stand, and we usually do know, in those relationships or those situations, we know where there needs to be tweaks, where we need to make changes. We do know. And so practicing the first two, and I'll just recap. Number 1, being jurisdiction and understanding the kingdom that's yours to rule. Number 2 is understanding the values and principles that guide your behavior and motivate you to get involved or not get involved. And then 3, the one we're on, practice, practice, practice. Taking those first two and daily, sometimes hourly, putting them into practice. And that's going to look all kinds of different ways for all kinds of different people in all kinds of situations. But if you are armed with the conscious awareness of what your jurisdiction is, what your values are, and you practice those, then it's going to get easier and easier and easier to know exactly where to draw a boundary line and to maintain it. Because you'll have the conviction of knowing this is either a place that I am the ruler of, I'm the rightful ruler of my time and space, and what I choose to get involved in and how I choose to get involved. I reserve the right to say my sacred yes and sacred no, and it be enough. And my principles and values are deeply held by me. I value what I value, and I value it for a reason, and I'm not going to see it trampled in front of me and say or do nothing. When you're armed with that kind of clarity, then practicing it becomes a lot easier. And let me just say at this point that what I find interesting about boundaries and so many things is we've kind of got the cart before the horse on the responsibility issue. We often try to take responsibility that actually belongs to other people while not standing in our own responsibility. So like with boundaries, we're not always comfortable with being responsible to delineate or maintain what is a boundary for us, but then we want to take on the entire responsibility for the entire situation and try to make it all okay for everyone involved, and you just can't do that. And in all actuality, trying to be responsible for someone else's feelings when you maintain a boundary or to help them feel better about it, and maybe I should say it this way, being kind and being compassionate is always under good regulation, but ultimately other people's responses are not up to you. Ultimately, other people's responses are not your jurisdiction. That is the jurisdictional realm of someone else, of whoever's involved. It's your responsibility to understand the landscape, know your ground, know your jurisdiction, know your values, and practice them until it becomes the habit, the new normal. And then you also have to practice letting everyone else take responsibility for their responses to that. There are going to be a lot of people who want to impose their will on situations and people around them. You encounter them every day, and in all likelihood, if you're like me, you do it every day. You're not always conscious of it. That's one thing about maintaining healthy boundaries. When you get this conscious to begin to have better boundaries, you start to become conscious of maybe where you have pushed other people's lines when you didn't have the right to. And so consciousness is kind of a double-edged sword, but our lives are going to be made better by it. And so when you take responsibility for what it is you want in your time and space according to your values, and you practice that because it's part of being in your integrity, then you also practice letting other people have the response to that they have. And they may not be happy with you. There are plenty of people who want you to do what they want you to do. You only have enough time and energy and resources left to do with what you decide to do. And, you know, if you've had a problem in the past of people not listening to you or taking your no at face value, it could be that they could sense that you're a little, I don't like the word wishy-washy, I'm not trying to be insulting, but we've all been a little wishy-washy when we've said no, when our energy has kind of been, I don't really want to do this, but I also don't want you to be mad at me or think bad of me. Well, when you stand in your integrity, you stand in your jurisdiction, you stand in your principles, and you practice those, and you stand in your integrity, and you say yes, and you say no, and you mean them, and you back them up. And you keep doing that, and you practice that. Other people, the people around us, are going to understand that now, when we say no or yes, that's what we mean. We have to retrain people that we now are beginning to mean what we say. It's an adjustment for them too. It's a new normal for them. The bottom line is, if we've practiced saying yes when we really mean no, then we have been the biggest culprit in training the people around us not to obey our boundaries. That buck stops with us. And it will stop. It absolutely will stop if we begin to practice these three things. Know your jurisdiction, know your principles and your values, and practice, and know that it's your right to practice because it's your integrity and your space. And there's no way that you're going to rule your space if you don't practice ruling your space. You're not trying to be Genghis Khan and beat down anybody else and try to take over their scepters and their thrones and their kingdoms. You're just wanting to rule yours. And so when you've allowed them to come deeply into your territory with their needs and their wants, when you begin to push them back on their side of the line, there are those who will see that as you're advancing on them. It's okay. You just have to retrain them. They don't seem to understand that the boundary for your property is actually 2 miles back, and you've just been letting them cross that. They may not know where the boundary line is because you've allowed them past it so far. They'll get it. Just know your space, know your principles, and practice those. And you keep doing this over days and weeks and months of time, you will get stronger in it. It will become the new normal. It will get less hard. You will stretch, develop those muscles that can cope and bear with tension. You can. You will. And you'll grow in the process. So, thank you for joining me for this video. And like I said before, if you have any questions or comments about any of this content, please leave it in the space below. And I'll see you next time.